Yomi is dedicated for Shmira for the Chayalim, Tzoa for the Shvuyim, and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael, and this Eist Tzara. So we are going to start. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Kamma 104. We're going to start on 103b, where 5 lines from the bottom. Now, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about the following. And our Mishnah had said that if you stole money from somebody, Rahmano Litzlan, and then you denied about it under oath, that you have to bring the money all the way to Medea in order to return the money to them, even to travel to the end of the world. And the Gemara tries to connect this with another dispute, which is not exactly the same, but it's similar, a dispute between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva about where you stole money from one of 5 people and you don't know which person you exactly stole the money from. So Rabbi Tarfon says, just drop the money, in the middle of the group, and then you're done. And Rabbi Akiva says you have to pay each of them. Gemara first wants to know, who's our Mishnah like? Is like Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. The first approach was that our Gemara is actually like Rabbi Akiva, and we want to say, Rashi says that Gemara is like Rabbi Akiva because in general, the Stam Mishnayos come from the tree of Rabbi Akiva and his students. So the first glance is to say the Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva, who says you have to return the money to each and every single person. You have to go to a faraway place even to return it. But then the Gemara raised several questions against Rabbi Akiva, and so now on the bottom of 103b, the Gemara says, El Olam Rabbi Tarfon. Our Mishnah is like Rabbi Tarfon, who said that when you stole from 5 people, you don't know which one, you just put the money down and leave. So Moda Rabbi Tarfon would admit, when does Rabbi Tarfon allow you to just drop the money and go? That's where you didn't take an oath. But in this case, you took an oath and you swore falsely. There, he would admit that you have to travel to the end of the world to return it. My timer, and it's a pasuk that is talked about somebody who took a false oath, that he needs to give it to him on the day of his guilt. So therefore, we see from here that Rabbi Tarfon would agree that in this case, you'd have to bring it to the end of the world. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva would say, so what's the machogus between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva here? We assume that there is a dispute. The Gemara is assuming there is a dispute. So Rabbi Akiva would say that even if you didn't take an oath, Rabbi Akiva would make you go to Medea to return the money. And the Gemara says, well, wait, the Rabbi Tarfon milti hecha de mishtabe lo sagi dulo hoda. Rabbi Tarfon is talking about a case where you took an oath, but where you took an oath, where do we say you have to go to the end of the world and pay the 5th? That's where you admitted it. So since we're talking about a case where you admitted it, my area of Nishba, why is it only that you have to go there if you want to get teshuvah? I feel below shvua, even without an oath, you should have to go there if you want to get atonement from God. Tanya, because I feel below shvua nami. Tanya, we learned in the Brayso. And Moda Rabbi Tarfon would admit, but Omer Lashnaim, that where a person says to 2 people, Gazalti echa mikem, Mana, I stole $100 from one of you. I don't know who I stole from. No sin was them money, was them money. Then Rabbi Tarfon would admit in that case where he admitted that he took it from them. He just doesn't know from which one. Rabbi Tarfon would admit that in the case where he admitted that he wants to get atonement, that he would have to pay back each one. Shekvar, hodami piatum, because he did because he admitted on his own, and therefore he wants to fulfill the heavenly requirements. And even though the court would not make him pay to each one, the court would say just put it down in front of them. Nevertheless, he does not want to get a divine punishment, so he would have to pay to each one. So in our case too, since it's a case of admission, even without an oath, he'd have to go. So therefore, how can we connect the dispute in our Mishnah? So therefore, Rava says, really, what we're going to say is our Mishnah can actually not reflect a dispute between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. It wasn't necessarily intuitive to me that it would anyways, but Rava has that conclusion. He says it's not necessarily a dispute between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva because our Mishnah is talking about a different case. Shani Masnisin, our Mishnah is talking about a different case. Why? The Kivan Diyada Laman Gazle, since the guy knows who he stole it to, Va'odule, and he admits it to him. We're talking about a case where Reuven knows he stole it from Shimon, and he admits it to him. But just the fact is, Shimon's a Medea. Well, at that point, keeping the Efshar Dure, Mimono, and Mare, since it's possible to return it, Havile, so now the relationship between Reuven and Shimon has shifted. Shimon knows that Reuven has his money, so it's as though he says to him, Yili biyadcha, that okay, until you return it, you guard my money. Basically, you're my it's like I have a deposit with you, and therefore hilkach nishba. So if the person who has the money would have taken an oath, then we'll say afagav de ka'amarle yuli biyadcha, even though he's saying to him in effect that you're responsible for watching it, even the bay kapara, since he wants to achieve atonement for his false oath, that he has to actually bring it to Shimon. But if he wouldn't take the oath, avigabe pikado, and that'll be like a deposit at the asi b'shakolei. And then it's like a deposit until the person who was robbed can come and get it. So that's what our Mishnah is referring to. And it's not really a dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon on that. Or it's not a dispute. Okay, so now we go to the next case. And now we're talking about whether or not a person can appoint an agent. Now, we know that there are agents throughout the Talmud. There are, of course, people can appoint what we call today power of attorney or an agent, but their effectiveness is limited, or their power or authority is limited. Here we want to know if the agent really is stepping in for the person. So as Rashi explains, if Reuven owes money, if in the case is Reuven has money in the hand of Shimon and he wants to send his agent, and Shimon can give the money to Reuven's agent, and it's as though he gave it directly to Reuven. So let's look at this case. And let's say you have an agent and you appoint this agent with witnesses. So Rav Chisda Amar, under those circumstances, Rav Chisda says, Hare Shaliach. Rav Chisda says if you appoint the agent with witnesses, that's a valid agent. Whereas Rabbah says Lo Ave Shliach. Rabbah says the agent is not your agent. Rav Chisda says that Have Shliach is an agent. That's why he went out of his way. That's why he appointed an agent with witnesses. The Leiku Bershuse says that Reuben is saying to Shimon, give the money to my agent. It's like you gave it to me. And Rabbah says, Lo Ave Shliach. Rabbah says, not an agent. This is all he's saying. Inish mehemnahu. He's saying, I'm not telling you that you're done with your responsibility once you give it to this guy. I'm just saying this guy is a trustworthy guy. You have to make a risk assessment. He's samach. If you want to rely upon this person, samoch, you can rely upon him and give it to him because he's trustworthy. If you want to take the risk and send it to me with him, you can. But he is not the same as me. You have not given it to me just by giving it to him. That's what how Rabbah interprets this statement. That's why it points him to Nan. So we learned. So let's try and bring a proof. So the Gemara says, let's try and bring a proof that against Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says that the guy is your agent. We know Ashol as a borrower. We know that as somebody who borrows a cow, we know generally speaking that a borrower is responsible for all accidents once the borrowed item comes into his possession. But in this case, a guy borrowed a cow. The person who is lending it lends the cow, but he doesn't give it directly to the borrower. He sends it in the hands of his son, his servant, or his agent, either his own or the agent of the borrower. And then the animal dies, we're going to say he's pater. Umesa pater, we'll say he's exempt. But why is he exempt? If the animal had really reached his possession, he'd be responsible. So it's therefore an indication that even though he appoints an agent, that the animal is not in his possession, and so therefore he's not responsible yet, even though the animal reached his agent. So the Gemara says, now what kind of agent are we talking about? What kind of agent are we referring to? If this is an agent that you didn't appoint with witnesses, minayadinan, well, of course, he wouldn't be responsible. How would we even know that this is his agent? So therefore, it must be al the asaba edim. We're talking about a case where the agent was appointed with witnesses, and still, even though he gave the cow into the borrower's agent, we're still going to say he's exempt. The katan and the patra, the borrower is still exempt. And this proves that even though it's appointed with witnesses, that is not going to be considered a real agent. So the Gemara says, Kasha or Rav Chisda. So isn't this therefore a difficulty with Rav Chisda, who says an agent that's appointed with witnesses is considered a valid agent? The Gemara says, no, what Rav Chisda would say is, Kedam Rav Chisda b'schira v'lokito. Like Rav Chisda said in a different context, now we're talking about a sachir or a lokito. What's a sachir or lokito? These are guys who work for you, that they're your hired help, they're your contractors, you always have them around your house. So the assumption is that he's acting as your agent, but he was never formally appointed with witnesses, and so therefore you're not responsible for an accident that occurs once it had been given to him. And hachinami b'schira v'lokito. And where do we learn this principle of schira v'lokito? We learned in a different statement that Rav Chisda explained. And there's another question on Rav Chisda from our Mishnah, and that's why this Gemara is being brought here. It says that if you owe money, well, yitin lo levno v'lo l'shlucho, you're not allowed to give the money to pay it to the guy's son or to his agent. Meaning to say you have to give it directly to him. You're responsible until the money goes directly into his hands. Now, what kind of agent are we referring to? Either also if it was an agent that was not appointed with witnesses. How would we even know? The agent was appointed with witnesses, and still we say you're not exempt from your responsibilities until you give it directly to the owner and not to his agent. So this is a question on Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda would say, no, Tirgama Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda would explain with Slira V'Lokito. Now we're talking about a case where he was kind of a guy who was like a ben bias in your house. He worked for you, but you didn't formally appoint him to be your agent. But if that's so Gemara says, so you mean to say if the agent would have formally appointed him with witnesses, then Rav Chisda's argument is saying that our Mishnah is saying that indeed he is a valid agent, that you can be exempt by giving the money to that person. Well, if that's the case, at the Tani Seifa, why does the next clause, when it brings the second case, it says, it says it could give it to an agent of the court. According to you, Rav Chisda, the Mishnah should have brought a closer distinction, which is shliach she'asa be'edim. If it was the agent that was appointed with actual witnesses, as opposed to just being slira v'lokito, then you would be valid in giving it to. Then you would be exempt from your responsibilities by giving it to that agent. So the Gemara says, Rav Chisda would answer, shliach she'asa be'edim hachinami dav shliach. Indeed, if the agent had been appointed with witnesses, it really is a valid agent. But what will we say here? Rav Chisda would say, lo psikule, that this case of an agent that was appointed with witnesses, it's not a clear ruling, and the Mishnah wants to give a clear ruling. But the shliach bezdin loshna aso nigzal loshna aso gazlan. The agent of the court, that's a clear ruling, because it doesn't matter who appoints the agent, whether it's the guy who was robbed or the robber. And he goes to the court, and the court recognizes him. That's considered to be an agent. But shliach she'asa be'edim. But if the agent was appointed with witnesses, the kiasu nigzal hu davei shliach. That if the guy who was robbed appointed him to be his agent, that's a valid shliach. Asu gazlan, if the robber appoints him, lo ave shliach, that would not be considered a valid agent, meaning to say the guy Reuven robbed Shimon, and now Reuven says, I'm appointing Levi to be Shimon's agent. No, that doesn't work. So since that doesn't work, therefore, lo psikule. Therefore, this case was not listed in the Mishnah. Uafuke mehai tana. Our Mishnah, which says that a shliach bezdin can be appointed, an agent of the court can be appointed even by the robber, by himself, and that's considered to be a valid agent. That actually argues with the following brayso. The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, shliach bezdin she'asu nigzal v'lo asu gazlan. If the agent was made by the guy who was robbed, the nigzal, but not by the robber, o asu gazlan, v'shalach halav v'nato eshalom miyado, or if the robber himself did it, and then the nigzal went and he took it straight from his hands, Potter, under those cases, he's exempt. But the implication from the accidents, and the reason is because the person was robbed, took it. But if it was just taken from the initial agent that was appointed by the court, it's not going to be valid, even if the robber appointed him. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, the Amri Travayu. So now Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, both of them say shliach she'aso be'edim have a shliach. They both say like Rav Chisda, and an agent that was appointed by the court is indeed an agent. What about the fact, Vim Tomer Mishnah Seinu? What about the fact that our Mishnah says that you have to give it directly to the person who was robbed and not to his agent? So if you say our Mishnah, no, our Mishnah is talking about B'mam Tzilo Shliach. Our Mishnah is talking about our Mishnah is talking about a case where he just was Mam Tzilo Shliach. He just basically said to him, he made an agent available to him. He didn't actually appoint him with witnesses. The Amrullah, he said to the person who was the robber, Isli Zuzi Gabi Polanya. He says to the agent, the guy was robbed, says to the agent, listen, Ruben owes me money. And he's not finding anybody to send it. It's Chaziway, just show up at his office. Maybe he can't find anybody to send it, and now you're just going to make yourself available. But it's not. And under those circumstances, if an accident happens to the agent on the way, then the robber still owes the money. Inami could Rav Chisda, or else our Mishnah is referring to the case of Rav Chisda, but Slir Volakito. There wasn't a formal agent. It was just the case of a guy who worked around his household. So now, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, and says Shmuel, what's the halach of Shmuel here? Ein Mishalchan Maos, that you're not able to send money, bidiyukni. So what's a diyukni? Rashi says the case is that the guy who owns the deposit, let's say Reuben has a deposit with Shimon, and he says, he gives to the agent a sign. Let's say he gives him a letter, and he writes on it, with his letter, with his signature, and he says, go show this to this person and tell him to give me the money that he has. Tell him to give me my $1 million that he's holding for me in cash. I'm giving you a letter, and send the money to me. So Shmuel says, no, that if the guy who's watching the deposit would give it to the person, he would still be responsible unless he gives it directly to the owner of the deposit. Even if there are witnesses signed on this diyukni, it would be insufficient. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, if there are witnesses signed on it, mishalchen, then the guy who's guarding the deposit would be able to send it. So Amri Shmuel, so according to Shmuel, says you can't send it with a diyukni, my takanta. So how could you, is there any way to get the money back to the person unless the two parties travel together? Is there any other way to do it? So he says, yeah, I'll tell you how. One time, Rabbi Abba, he had money with Rav Yosef, and Amalei or Rav Safra, so he said to Rav Safra, Rabbi Abba said to Rav Safra, when you come there, I sinu nihile. He says, when you come to that household, when you come to Rav Yosef Bar Kamma, I want you to bring with you the money that from Rav Yosef, meaning to say, you go get my money. And then what happened was, when Rav Safra got there, Rava, the son of Rav Yosef, says, did he write you a document saying, I am accepting upon myself this statement that the responsibility is no longer on Rav Yosef, it's now on me when you give it to my agent, and you give it to Rav Safra? Amarle lo. He said, no, he never didn't do it. So Rava, the son of Rav Yosef, says, zil bereisha. Get out of here, basically. Go back to the beginning. Go back to Rabbi Abba, and you don't have a signed document, we're not sending with you. He says, and then write this document hiskapalti. Masof Amarle, but in the end, Rava said back to Rav Safra, actually, because of Chanami hiskapalti, Rav Kumhu. Even if he wrote for you hiskapalti, that's also insufficient. Dilma ada asis shachiv Rabbi Abba v'naflo zuze kameyasme, because maybe before you get here, Rabbi Abba will die, and then his money will fall to the heirs, and Vizkabalti de Rabbi Abba will have kumu. And then the fact that he wrote, "I appoint you to get it," and you're receiving it, that expires with Rabbi Abba's death. The shlichus ain't shlichus achar misa, that the appointment is gone, and that also wouldn't be sufficient. So the Gemara says, so what could we possibly do so we could get the money? So he says, I'll tell you what he could do. Zil, this is what Rava says to Rav Safra, Rava, the son of Rav Yosef. He says, Zil nikninu lecha agav ara. Tell Rabbi Abba to basically give you the money, agav, by basically giving you a small parcel of land, either renting it to you, and then as a result of that, agav that, he can also transfer you the money. So you basically have a debt to Rabbi Abba. He's giving you the money. V'sa'at kesovon is kabalti, and you come and you write us a receipt that you got it. Ki other Rav Papa have a masik tracer alfei zuzei bechuzai. Rav Papa had $12,000, 12,000 zuzim in this place called Bechuzai. Akninu niu Rav Shmuel bar Abba, and then he gave it to Rav Shmuel bar Abba so that Rav Shmuel bar Abba could bring it through an agav, a seifa de besa, by an agav, through this dint, by dint of the fact that he gave him a small piece at the end of his house, and kiyasa, and when Rav Shmuel bar Abba came, nafaka ape ad tavach, that he went out to greet him until the place called Tavach, because he was so happy that he was bringing him his money. He was so happy that he was bringing him his money, and he went out to greet him. This happiness that people have for their money is, people get so happy. But maybe we should have this happiness for Torah. So, and anyway, this is an indication. He went out all the way to greet him to Tavach. So now the Mishnah had said that if you deny the deposit that you owe, if you deny the principal of what you owe under oath, then you have to pay back the principal plus 1/5 plus bring a carbon. Well, we learned in the Mishnah that he gave him the principal, but he didn't give him the fifth, or the guy waived the right to the principal, but not to the fifth. Then he doesn't need to go all the way out to Medea to return it. He only has to go for the principal, but not for the fifth. So we see from here, from the fact that it says in the Mishnah that the robber doesn't have to go to Madai to bring the Chomesh, that teaches us Alma Chomesh Memonahu. This extra fifth that he's paying is not an atonement, because if it was an atonement, the Mishnah wouldn't even have to teach us this. It would be so obvious that he doesn't have to bring the atonement money all the way to Medea. It's compensatory and not punitive, and therefore it needs to teach us that he doesn't need to bring it. But since it's compensatory, Mishamala Yorshin, the heirs have to pay the father's debts. The heirs have to pay the father's debts. And so therefore, now, if it would be atonement, there's no kapara after Misa, so they wouldn't have to pay the atonement. But that this is considered a loan, a debt, and so therefore he has to pay it. The heirs have to pay it. But Tananami, Nasanasakar, we learned in our Mishnah that let's say he gave the principal, Vinishbal Chomesh, and he swore falsely about the fifth. All right, most if Chomesh al Chomesh, he has to add on 1/5 to the 1/5. That's a further proof that this fifth is Mamona is compensatory. And we have another price. Goes as Chavero, somebody robs his friend, and Vinishbalo, and he swore falsely, Umeis, and then he dies. Yorshim Shaman Karen the Chomesh, they pay the fifth also, the principal of the fifth. Uptur min Osham, they don't bring the Osham because that is considered an atonement. So the Yorshim b'nei Shluma, the Gemara asks, the Yorshim b'nei Shluma Chumsha Davunava are really the heirs? Do they have to pay the 1/5 that their father owned? Is that really the case? But we have a contradictory source. It says Adain Ani Omer, that the Brisa says, because the Bryce, it's the Dainani Omer. I might say, I might have thought, when does he not pay the fifth? Bisman shel nishba, when he didn't swear falsely. Lo huv lo aviv, neither he nor his father, but huv lo aviv, if he swore falsely, but not his father, or aviv lo hu, his father swore, but not him. Huv aviv, he and his father both swore falsely. Minayin. How do I know that then also the son has to pay the extra 1/5? Hamalomar asher gazal asher ashak. Hulo gazal hulo ashak. And so therefore, since the son did not steal or rob, therefore he doesn't have to pay the fifth. So how can we say in the first source that the son has to pay that 1/5 penalty, the 1/5 extra penalty? But here we're saying he doesn't. So it depends whether or not the father admitted to the fact that he did that he had sworn falsely. If he did, then the son has to pay the fifth. Otherwise, he doesn't. Mar says, well, if the father never admitted it, then the son also should not have to pay the principal. And if you want to say, that he's also not paying the principal because the father never admitted, for the fact that the price, it doesn't make sense because the fact the price is talking about the fifth means he does pay the principal. And further we say, when does he pay the principal? For his father's death, where he swore falsely and also his father did. But but if his father did it but not him, or he did not his father, or not he nor his father, the verse that we say, yesh Talmud. So we see that he wouldn't have to pay under those circumstances. And the Gemara concludes by saying yesh Talmud. So the Gemara first interrupts by saying, what does it mean yesh Talmud? Yosef Rav Huna v'Kamar Lashmaita, and Amalei Rabba Brei yesh Talmud Kamar Mar. What did he actually say? Did he say yesh Talmud, that there is a teaching that tells us that the heirs have to pay the principal but not the fifth? Or Yishtalmu Kamar Mar? Or are they saying it's based upon or is he just saying that he has to pay back the deposit or is he just giving that ruling, but not based upon a verse? Amrei yesh Talmud kamina mi riboy dekra amri. So he's saying basically that there is, from the verse itself, we're learning this law. But anyway, we see from this brisa that the heirs pay the principal, but they don't pay the 1/5. And so therefore, why can we say earlier that they pay the fifth? Elamai. So what must we say? Lo hoda. So when it says he didn't admit, it means lo hoda aviv v'hoda beno. That means that the father didn't admit and the son admitted it, and so therefore under those circumstances, he doesn't pay the fifth. The Gemara says, but the son should have to pay the 1/5 because he himself swore falsely. So we're talking about a case, you only have to pay the 1/5 if the stolen item is still intact. The Gemara says, well, if the stolen item is not still intact, I feel then he shouldn't even have to pay back the principal. The Gemara says, no, the Tana is saying this law in a case where he left assets to pay it back. He left real estate. But still, Milval pay, it's an oral loan. Milval pay, you shouldn't collect that from the heirs or from the purchasers. The Gemara says, no, what we're talking about is B'Sha'amad B'Din, that they went to the court before he died. And so since he had to pay, it's a loan. So the Gemara says, well, B'Sha'amad B'Din, if they went to the court and it was ruled, then he should also have to pay the fifth. No, you don't pay the fifth on real estate, is exempt from that. Rava gives one last answer. No, basically what happened was he had the money that the father stole was in the other people's possession. And then he discovered it after he took the oath. So Karen Mashalim, he has to pay back the principal because he found it, but the Chomesh Mashalim, but not the fifth. He didn't know about it, so he doesn't pay back the fifth because he didn't swear falsely, but the principal he pays back because he found it. All right, we'll stop the recording here. Shkoyach to everybody. If anybody has any questions, happy to